Hello. Hello. I'm trying to plug in my phone because it was dying. Let me just check X. I see I have a notification. Oh, it's not important. Oh my gosh. Everything's happening so quickly. What's going on? Is everything fine? Everything's fine. Hi. This is the first time in a while that I've actually done 2 live streams in a row. I haven't skipped a week. Woo! Oh, I'm trying to take out my socks. Sorry. Don't look at all the laundry behind me. And don't look at me. I was gonna take a shower before I did this, and then I was on TikTok instead. So I look gross. Let's ignore that. I didn't fold my clothes. Let's ignore that. We're here to read. We're on chapter 10. So chapter 10 is the beginning of part 3, which is the grown-ups. So it's we're gonna start off with the reunion with them all coming back to Derry and eating at Jade at the Orient. So there'll be a lot of talking in this chapter, which is great because we all know Stephen King likes to drone on and on with the descriptive stuff, and I get tired really quickly. So hopefully this will go well. We're gonna do the first 3 parts of the chapter, hopefully, if I can hold up to it, which is them going to Jade at the Orient and chatting. So let's dive right in. I have the 2017 movie paperback copy of it, which starts chapter 10 on page 481. I don't know what page it's on for you if you have a different copy, if you want to follow along, but it is chapter 10, the reunion, and the beginning of part 3, grown-ups. Let me just take some sips of my drinks first. We're caffeinated tonight. Okay. Also, my parents are watching a movie, like they always are, so if it's loud, sorry. Okay. Chapter 10, the reunion. 1. Bill Denbrough gets a cab. The telephone was ringing, bringing him up and out of sleep. Nope, start over. The telephone was ringing, bringing him up and out of a sleep too deep for dreams. He groped for it without opening his eyes, without coming more than halfway awake. If it had stopped ringing just then, he would have slipped back down to his sleep without a hitch. He would have done it as simply and easily as he once had slipped down the snow-covered hills in McCarran Park on his flexible flyer. You ran with the sled, threw yourself onto it, and down you went, seemingly at the speed of sound. You couldn't do that as a grown-up. It raked the hell out of your balls. His fingers walked over the telephone's dial, slipped off, and climbed it again. He had a dim premonition that it would be Mike Hanlon calling from Derry, telling him he had to come back, telling him that he had to remember, telling him they had made a promise. Stanyers had cut their palms with the silver of sliver of Coke bottle, and they had made a promise. Except all that had already happened. He'd gotten in late yesterday afternoon, just before 6 p.m., actually. He supposed that, if he had been the last call on Mike's list, all of them must have gone in at varying times. Some might even have spent most of the day here. He himself had seen none of them, felt no urge to see any of them. He had simply checked in, gone up to his room, ordered a meal from room service, which he had found he could not eat once it was laid out before him, and then had tumbled into bed and slept dreamlessly until now. Bill cracked one eye open and fumbled for the telephone's handset. It fell off onto the table, and he groped for it, opening his other eye. Choose different words, Stephen. You used grope for a telephone twice. Writing notes for Mr. Stephen King. He felt totally blank inside his head, totally unplugged, running on batteries. He finally managed to scoop up the phone. He got on one elbow and put it up against his ear. Hello? Bill? It was Mike Hanlon's voice. He'd had at least that much right. Last week he didn't remember Mike at all, and now a single word was enough to identify him. It was rather marvelous, but in an ominous way. Yeah, Mike. Woke you up, huh? Yeah, you did. That's okay. On the wall above the TV was an abysmal painting of lobstermen in yellow slickers and rain hats pulling lobster traps. Oh my gosh. You know, it's Maine. Lobsters. Looking at it, Bill remembered where he was. The Derry townhouse on Upper Main Street. Half a mile farther up and across the street was Bassey Park, the Kissing Bridge, the canal. What time is it, Mike? 10:15. What day? The 30th? Mike sounded a little amused. Yeah, 'kay. I've arranged a little reunion, Mike said. He sounded diffident now. Yeah? Bill swung his legs out of bed. They all came? All but Stan Uris, Mike said. Now there was something in his voice that Bill couldn't read. Bev was the last one. She got in late last evening. Why do you say the last one, Mike? Stan might show up today. Bill, Stan's dead. What? How? Did his plane? Nothing like that, Mike said. Stan, come here. I'm sorry. Look, if it's all the same to you, I thought it ought to wait until we get together. It would be better if I could tell all of you at the same time. It has to do with this? Yes, I think so, Mike paused briefly. I'm sure it does. Bill felt the familiar weight of dread settle around his heart again. Was it something you could get used to so quickly then? Or had it been something he'd carried all along, simply unfelt and unthought of, like the inevitable fact of his own death? He reached for his cigarettes, lit one, and blew out the match with the first drag. I didn't know he smoked. Interesting. None of them got together yesterday? No, I don't believe so. And you haven't seen any of us yet? No, just talked to you on the phone. Okay, he said. Where's the reunion? You remember where the old ironworks used to be? Pasture Road, sure. You're behind the times, old chum. That's Mall Road these days. It's not called. We've got the third biggest shopping mall Mall Road. We've got the third biggest shopping mall in the state out there. 48 different merchants under one roof for your shopping convenience. Sounds really American, all right. Bill? What? You all right? Yes. But his heart was beating too fast, the tip of his cigarette jittering a little bit. He had stuttered, like I'd heard it. If you couldn't tell, that was me stuttering. There was a moment of silence, and then Mike said, just out past the mall, there's a restaurant called Jade of the Orient. They have private rooms for parties. I arranged for one of them yesterday. We can have it the whole afternoon if we want. You think this might take that long? I just don't know. A cab will know how to get there? Sure. All right, Bill said. He wrote the name of the restaurant down on the pad of paper by the phone. Why there? Because it's new, I guess, Mike said slowly. It seemed like, I don't know, neutral ground, Bill suggested. Yes, I guess that's it. I'm marking that. I like that they do it because it's new. Food any good? I don't know, Mike said. How's your appetite? Bill chuffed out smoke and half laughed, half coughed. It ain't so good, old pal. Yeah, Mike said. I hear you. Noon? More like 1, I guess. We'll let Beverly catch a few more Z's. But Bill snuffed a cigarette. She married? Mike hesitated again. We'll catch up on everything, he said. Just like when you go back to your high school reunion 10 years later, huh? Bill said. You get to see who got fat, who got bald, who got kids. I wish it was like that, Mike said. Yeah, me too, Mikey. Me too. He hung up the phone. Interesting that he stuttered on kids, because, they can't have kids. An American, because his wife's not American. I'm kidding about that one. Okay. He hung up the phone, took a long shower, and then ordered breakfast that he didn't want, which he only picked at. No, his appetite was really not much good at all. Bill dialed the big yellow cab company and asked to be picked up at 1:15, thinking that 15 minutes would be plenty of time to get him out to Pasture Road. He found himself totally unable to think about his mall road, even when he actually saw the mall. But he had underestimated the lunch hour traffic flow, and how much Derry had grown. In 1958, it had not been a big town. It had been a big town, not much more. There were maybe 30,000 people inside the Derry incorporated city limits, and maybe another 7,000 beyond that in the surrounding burgs. Now it had become a city, a very small city by London or New York standards, but doing just fine by Maine standards, where Portland, Bill State's largest, could boast barely 300,000. As the cab moved slowly down Main Street, we're over the canal now, Bill thought. Can't see it, but it's down there running in the dark. And then turned up center. His first thought was predictable enough, how much it changed. But the predictable thought was accompanied by a deep dismay that he would never have expected. He remembered his childhood here as a fearful, nervous time, not only because of the summer of '58, where the 7 of them had faced the terror, but because of Georgie's death, the deep dream his parents seemed to have fallen into following that death, the constant ragging about his stutter, Bowers and Huggins and Chris constantly on the prod for them after the rock fight in the Barrens. Bowers and Huggins and Chris, oh my! Bowers and Huggins and Chris, oh my! And just a feeling that Derry was cold, that Derry was hard, that Derry didn't give a shit about any of them, and that Derry didn't give a shit if any of them lived or died, and certainly not if they triumphed over Pennywise the Clown. Derry folk had lived with Pennywise in all his guises for a long time, and maybe in some mad way, they'd come to understand him, to like him, need him, love him? Maybe. Yes, maybe that too. So why this dismay? Perhaps only because it seemed like such a dull change somehow, or perhaps because Derry seemed to have lost its essential face for him. The Bijou Theater was gone, replaced with a parking lot. By permit only, the sign over the ramp announced. Violators subject to tow. The Shoebone and Bailey's Lunch, which had stood next to it, were also gone. They had been replaced by a branch of the Northern National Bank. A digital readout jutted from the front of the Stephen King's books are hard to read aloud. A digital readout jutted from the front of the bland cinder block structure, showing the time and the temperature, the latter in both degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Celsius. The Center Street drug lair of Mr. Keene, in the place where Bill had gotten Eddie his asthma medicine that day, was also gone. Richard's Alley had become a strange hybrid called a mini-mall. Looking inside as the cab idled in the stoplight, Bill could see a record shop, a natural food store, and a toy and games shop, which was featuring a clearance sale on all Dungeons and Dragons supplies. The cab pulled forward with a jerk. Gonna take a while, the driver said. I wish all these goddamn banks would stagger their lunch hours. Pardon my French for a religious man. That's all right, Bill said. It was overcast outside, and now a few splatters of rain hit the cab's windshield. The radio muttered about an escaped mental patient from somewhere who was supposed to be very dangerous, and then began muttering about the Red Sox who weren't. Showers early, then clearing. When Barry Manilow began moaning about Mandy, who gave without taking, the cabbie snapped the radio off. Bill asked, "When did they go up?" "What, the banks?" "Uh-huh." "Oh, late 60s, early 70s, most of them," the cabbie said. He was a big man with a thick neck. He wore a red and black checked hunter's jacket. Of course he did. It's mean. A fluorescent orange cap was jammed down squarely on his head. It was smudged with engine oil. They got this urban renewal money. Revenue sharing, they call it. So how shared it was... Let me start over. They got this urban renewal Nope. Oh my gosh. I can't read tonight. I'm so sorry. Why can't I do this? Okay, let's focus. They got this urban renewal money, revenue sharing they called it. So how they shared it was ripped down everything. And the banks come in. I guess that was all that they could afford to come in. Hell of a note, ain't it? Urban Renewal says they could afford... Urban Renewal says that. Oh, Urban Renewal says they. Shit for dinner, says I. Pardon my French for a religious man. There was a lot of talk about how they were gonna revitalize the downtown. Yep, they revitalized it just fine. Tore down most of the old stores and put up a lot of banks and parking lots. And you still can't find a fucking slot to park your car in. Ought to string the whole city council up by their cocks, except for that Pollock woman that's on it. String up by her tits. On second thought, it don't seem like she's got any. Flat as a fucking board. Pardon my French for a religious man. I am, Bill said, grinning. Then get out of my cab and go to a fucking church, the cabbie said, and they both burst out laughing. You lived here long? Bill asked. My whole life. Born in Derry Home Hospital, and they'll bury my fucking remains out in Mount Hope Cemetery. Good deal, Bill said. Yeah, right, the cabbie said. He hawked, rolled down his window, and spat an extremely large yellow-green lunger into the rainy air. Ooh, what if he's Pennywise? His attitude, contradictory but somehow attractive, almost piquant, was one of glum good cheer. Guy who catches that won't have to buy no fucking chewing gum for a week. Pardon my French for a religious man. Hasn't all changed, Bill said. The depressing promenade of banks and parking lots was slipping behind them as they climbed Center Street. Over the hill and past First National, they began to pick up some speed. Aladdin's still there. Yeah, the cabbie conceded, but just barely. Suckers tried to tear that down. Too. For another bank, Bill asked. part of him amused to find that another part of him still stood aghast to that idea. He couldn't believe that anyone in his right mind would want to tear down that stately pleasure dome with its glittering glass chandelier, its sweeping right and left staircases which spiraled up to the balcony, and its mammoth curtain, which did not simply pull apart when the shows started, but which instead rose in magical folds and tucks and gathers, all underlit in fabulous shades of red and blue and yellow and green, while pulleys off stage ratcheted and groaned. Not the Aladdin, that shocked part of him cried out. How could they ever think of tearing down the Aladdin for a bank? Oh, a bank, the cabbie said. You're fucking A, pardon my French if you're a religious man. It was the first merchants of Penobscot County had its eye on the Aladdin. Wanted to pull it down and put up what they called a complete banking mall. Got all the papers from the city council, and the Aladdin was condemned. Then a bunch of folks formed a committee, folks that had lived here a long time. And they petitioned, they marched, and they hollered, and finally they had a public city council meeting about it. And Hanlon blew those suckers out. The cabbie sounded extremely satisfied. Hanlon? Bill asked, startled. Mike Hanlon? Yep, the cabbie said. Am I saying a yup right? I don't know. Yep, a yup. He twisted around briefly to look at Bill, revealing a round, chapped face and horn-rimmed glasses with old specks of white paint on the bows. Sorry. Librarian, black fella, you know him? I think it's Pennywise that he's talking to. Okay. I did, Bill said, remembering how he had met Mike back in July of 1958. It had been Bowers and Huggins and Chris again. Of course. Bowers and Huggins and Chris, oh my. At every turn, playing their own part, with unwitting vise grips driving the seven of them together, tighter, tightest. Tightest. We played together when we were kids, before I moved away. Well, there you go, the cabbie said. It's a small fucking world, pardon my French if you're a religious man, Bill finished with him. There you go, the cabbie repeated comfortably. And they rode in silence for a while before he said, It's changed a lot, Jerry has. But yeah, a lot of it's still here. The townhouse where I picked you up, the Sandpiper Memorial Park. Remember that place, mister? We were kids, we used to think that place was haunted. I remember it, Bill said. Look, there's the hospital. You recognize it? They were passing the Dairy Home Hospital on the right now. Behind it, the Penobscot flowed toward its meeting place, the Kneskeg. Under this rainy spring sky, the river was dull pewter. The hospital that Bill remembered, a white wood-frame building with 2 wings, 3 stories high, was still there, but now was surrounded, dwarfed by the whole complex of buildings, maybe a dozen in all. He could see a parking lot to the left and what looked like 500 cars parked there. My God, that's not a hospital, it's a fucking college campus, Bill exclaimed. The cab driver cackled. Not being a religious man, I'll pardon your French. Yeah, it's almost as big as the Eastern Main up in Bangor now. They got radiation labs and a therapy center and 600 hospital rooms, and 600 rooms and their own laundry and God knows what else. The old hospital's still there, but it's all administration now. I wonder, because Bangor exists alongside Derry, but Derry is basically just Bangor, so what is Bangor? I don't know. It confuses me. This is a stream with a lot of commentary, sorry. A lot of commentary on my part tonight. We're only like 6 pages in. The cab driver Bill felt a queer doubling sensation in his mind, the sort of sensation he'd remembered getting the first time he watched a 3D movie, trying to bring together 2 images that didn't quite jibe. You remember, you could fool your eyes and your brain into doing that trick, he remembered, but you were apt to end up with a whopper of a headache, and he could feel his own headache coming on now. New Derry, fine, but the old Derry was still there, like the wooden home hospital building. What? Can I... Okay. You could fool your eyes and your brain into doing that trick, he remembered, but you were apt to end up with a whopper of a headache, and he could feel his own headache coming on now. Oh, sorry. The old area was mostly buried under all new construction, but your eye was somehow dragged helplessly back to look at it, to look for it. The train yard's probably gone, isn't it? Bill asked. Cabby laughed again, delighted. For someone who moved away when he was a kid, you got a memory. You got a good memory, mister. Bill thought, you should have met me last week, my sweet. You should have met me last week, my French-speaking friend. It's all still out there, but it's nothing but ruins and rusty tracks now. The freights don't even stop no more. Fellow wanted to buy the land and put up a whole roadside entertainment thing. Pitch and putt, batting cages, driving ranges, mini golf, go-karts, little shack full of video games. I don't know what all. But there's some kind of big mix-up about who owns the land now. I guess he'll get it eventually. He's a persistent fella, but right now it's in the courts. Do I sound like I have a Maine accent? Just wondering. I'm trying really hard with these Maine characters. And the canal, Phil murmured as they turned off Outer Center Street and onto Pasture Road, which, as Mike had said, was now marked with a green roadside reading Mall Road. The canal's still here. Yep, the cabbie said. That'll always be here, I guess. Now the Dairy Mall was on Bill's right and on Bill's left, and as they rolled past it, he felt that queer doubling sensation again. When they had been kids, all this had been a great long field full of rank grasses and gigantic nodding sunflowers, which marked the northeastern end of the barrens. Behind it, to the west, was the old Cape low-income housing development. Oh. He could remember them exploring this field, being careful not to fall into the gaping cellar hole of the Kitchener Ironworks, which had exploded on Easter Sunday in the year 1906. The field had been full of relics, and they had unearthed them with all the solemn interest of archaeologists exploring Egyptian ruins. Bricks, dippers, chunks of iron with rusty bolts hanging from them, panes of glass, bottles full of unnameable gunk that smelled like the worst poison in the world. Something bad had happened near there, too, in the gravel pit close to the dump. But he could not remember it yet. He could only remember a name, Patrick Humboldt, and that it had something to do with a refrigerator, and something to do with the bird that had chased Mike Hanlon. What? He shook his head. Fragments, straws in the wind, that was all. The field was gone now, as were the remains of the ironworks. Bill remembered the great chimney of the ironworks suddenly, faced with tile, caked with black with soot, for the final 10 feet of its length. It had lain in the high grass like a gigantic pipe. They had scrambled up somehow and had walked along it, arms held out like tight wire walkers, laughing. He shook his head, as if to dismiss the mirage of them all. An ugly collection of buildings with signs that said Sears and J.C. Penney and Woolworth and CVS and York Steakhouse and Walden Books and dozens of others. Roads wove in and out of parking lots. The mall did not go away because there was no mirage. Mirage. The Kitchener Ironworks was gone, and the field that had grown up around its ruins was likewise gone. The mall was a reality, not the memories. But somehow he didn't believe that. Here you go, mister, the cabbie said. He pulled into the parking lot of a building that looked like a large plastic pagoda. A little late, but better late than never, am I right? Indeed you are, Bill said. He gave the cab driver a $5. Keep the change. Good fucking deal, the cabbie exclaimed. You need someone to drive you? Call Big Yellow and ask for Dave. Ask for me by name. I'll just ask for the religious fella, Bill said, grinning. The one who's got his plot all picked out in Mount Hope. You got it, Dave said, laughing. Have a good one, mister. You too, Dave. He stood in the light rain for a moment, watching the cab draw away. He realized that he had meant to ask the driver one more question and had forgotten, perhaps on purpose. He meant to ask Dave if he liked living in Derry. Abruptly, Bill Denbrough turned and walked into the Jade of the Orient. Mike Hanlon was in the lobby, sitting in the wicker chair with a huge flaring back. He got to his feet, and Bill felt deep unreality wash over him, through him. The sensation of doubling was back, but now was much, much worse. Take out the queer. It wasn't the queer sensation, it was just the sensation. Why take out the queer? He's meeting Mike now. He remembered a boy who had been about 5'3", trim and agile. Before him was a man who stood about 5'7". He was skinny. His clothes seemed to hang on him, and the lines in his face said that he was on the darker side of 40 instead of only 38 or so. Bill's shock must have stolen on his face because Mike said quietly, I know how I look. Bill flushed and said, It's not that bad, Mike. It's just that I remember you as a kid. That's all it is. Is it? You look a little tired. I am a little tired, Mike said. But I'll make it, I guess. He smiled then, and the smile lit his face. In it, Bill saw the boy he had known 27 years ago. As the old wood-frame home hospital had been overwhelmed with modern glass and cinder block, so had the boy that Bill had known been overwhelmed with the inevitable accessories of adulthood. There were wrinkles on his forehead, lines had grooved themselves from the corners of his mouth nearly to his chin, and his hair was graying on both sides above the ears. But as the old hospital, although overwhelmed, was still there, still visible, so was the boy Mike had known. Mike stuck out his hand and said, "Welcome back to Derry, Big Bill." Bill ignored the hand and embraced Mike. Mike hugged him back fiercely, and Bill could feel his hair, stiff and kinky, against his own shoulder and the side of his neck. I'm gonna cry. Whatever's wrong, Mike will take care of it, Bill said. He heard the rough sound of tears in his throat and didn't care. We beat it once, and we can beat it again. Oh, that was bad. I don't know how to do the uhs. The beat it, because I say my again. Anyways, beat it again. Mike pulled away from him, held him at arm's length, although he was still smiling. There was too much sparkle in his eyes. He took out his handkerchief and wiped them. "Sure, Bill," he said. "You bet." "Would you gentlemen like to follow me?" the hostess said. She was a smiling Oriental woman in a delicate pink kimono upon which a dragon cavorted and curled its plaited tail. Her dark hair was piled high on her head and held with ivory combs. "I know the way, Rose," Mike said. "Very good, Mr. Hanlon." She smiled at the both of them. "You are well met in friendship, I think." "I think we are," Mike said. "This way, Bill." He led him down the dim corridor. Wait a minute. Mike said that he didn't know if the food was good, but he knows the hostess by name. Or did he just make conversation when he first came in? I think he's been there before, and he would know if the food is good. Thank you very much. Anyways, he led him down the dim corridor, past the main dining room, and toward a door where a beaded curtain hung. "The others," Bill began. "All here now," Mike said. "All that could come." Bill hesitated for a moment outside the door, suddenly frightened. It was not the unknown that scared him, but the supernatural. It was the simple knowledge that he was 15 inches taller than he had been in 1958, minus most of his hair. It's funny because in the 2017 to 2019 one, Bill didn't grow at all. His Jaden and James were the same height. I'm gonna stop talking. He was suddenly uneasy, almost terrified at the thought of seeing them all again, their children faces almost worn away, almost buried under change as the old hospital had been buried. Banks erected inside their heads where once magical picture palaces had stood. We grew up, he thought. We didn't think it would happen, not then, not to us. But it did. And if I go in there, it'll all be real. We're all grown-ups now. He looked at Mike, suddenly bewildered and timid. "How do they look?" he heard himself asking in a faltering voice. "Mike, how do they look?" "Come in and find out," Mike said, kindly enough, and led Bill into the small private room. I'm on page 492 right now, right at the top in my version, which is the 2017 paperback. I'm on 492. It's in the midst of chapter 10, part 2. Bill Denbrough gets a look. I want to start a list of all the times that Stephen King is inconsistent. Because he was on some drugs. I can't remember everything that went down in this. And we can see that when they introduced Stan and said he's a grade below us, but then 2 pages later, Ben was like, "Oh yeah, we were in the same class in 2nd grade. What's he a grade below you or not?" Come on. Anyways. Okay. 2. Bill Denbrough gets a look. Perhaps it was simply the dimness of the room that caused the illusion, which lasted only for the briefest moment, but Bill wondered later if it was some sort of message meant strictly for him, that fate could also be kind. In that brief moment, it seemed to him that none of them had grown up, that his friends had somehow done a Peter Pan act and were all still children. Richie Tozier still rocked back in his chair so that he was leaning against the wall, caught in the act of saying something to Beverly Marsh, who had a hand cupped over her mouth to hide a giggle. Richie had a wide-ass grin on his face that was perfectly familiar. There was Eddie Kasprack, sitting on Beverly's left, and in front of him on the table, next to his water glass, was a plastic squeeze bottle with a pistol grip handle curving down from its top. The trimmings were a little bit more state-of-the-art, but the purpose was obviously the same. It was an aspirator. Sitting at one end of the table, watching this trio with an expression of mixed anxiety, amusement, and Sitting at one end of the table, watching this trio with an expression of mixed anxiety, amusement, and concentration, was Ben Hanscom. Bill found his hand wanting to go to his head and realized with a sorry kind of amusement that in a second he had almost rubbed his Bill found his hand wanting to go to his head and realized with a sorry kind of amusement that in that second he had almost rubbed his pate to see if his hair had magically come back, that red, fine hair that he had begun to lose when he was only a college sophomore. That broke the bubble. Richie was not wearing glasses, he saw, and thought, he probably has contacts now. He would. He hated those glasses. The t-shirts and cord pants he habitually worn had been replaced by a suit that hadn't been purchased off any rack. Bill estimated that he was looking at $900 worth of tailor-made on the hoof. Beverly Marsh, if her name still was Marsh, had become a stunningly beautiful woman. Instead of the casual ponytail, her hair, which was almost exactly the same shade as his own had been, spilled over the shoulders of her plain white ship-and-shore blouse in a torrent of subdued color. In this dim light it merely glowed like a well-banked bed of embers. In daylight, even the light of such a subdued day like this one, Bill imagined it would flame, and he found himself wondering what it would feel like to plunge his hands into that hair. The world's oldest story, he thought wryly. I love my wife, but oh, you kid. Whoa! I love my wife, but oh, you kid. Ugh, Bill. Eddie, it was weird but true, had grown up to look quite a little bit like Anthony Perkins. His face was prematurely lined, although in his movements he seemed somehow younger than either Richie or Ben, and made older still by the rimless spectacles he wore. Spectacles you would imagine a British barrister wearing as he approached the bench or leafed through a legal brief. His hair was short, worn in an out-of-date style that had been known as Ivy League in the late 50s and early 60s. He was wearing a loud checked sport coat that looked like something grabbed from the distressed sale rack of a men's clothing store that would be shortly out of business. With a watch on one wrist was a Patek Philippe, and the ring on the little finger of his right hand was a ruby. He has a pinky ring! He has a pinky ring! You guys know what pinky rings are? It means that you're gay! He has a pinky ring! And it's a ruby! It's a ruby! The stone was too hugely vulgar and too ostentatious to be anything but real. Ben was the one who had really changed, and looking at him again, Bill felt unreality wash easily over him. His face was the same, and his hair, although graying and longer, was combed in the same unusual right side part. But Ben had gotten thin. He sat easily in his chair, his unadorned leather vest open to show the blue chambray work shirt beneath. He wore Levi's with straight legs, cowboy boots, and a wide belt with a beat and silver buckle. Of course he would wear cowboy boots in Maine. These clothes clung easily to a body which was slim and narrow-hipped. He wore a bracelet with heavy links on one wrist, not gold links, but copper ones. He got thin, Bill thought. He's a shadow of his former self, so to speak. Old Ben got thin. Wonders never cease. There was a moment of silence among the six of them that was beyond description. It was one of the strangest moments Bill Dambro ever passed in his life. Stan was not here, but a seventh had come nonetheless. Here in this private restaurant dining room, Bill felt its presence so fully that it was almost personified, but not as an old man in a white robe with a scythe, Grim Reaper, on his shoulder. It was the white spot on the map that lay between 1958 and 1985, an era an explorer may have called the Great Don't Know. Bill wondered what exactly was there. Beverly Marsh in a short skirt which showed most of her long, cultish legs. A Beverly Marsh in white go-go boots, her hair parted in the middle and ironed. Richie Tozier wearing a sign that said "Stop the war" on one side and get ROTC off campus on the other. Ben Hanscom in a yellow hard hat with a flag decal in the front, running a bulldozer under a canvas parasol, his shirt off, showing a stomach which protruded less and less over the waistband of his pants. Was the seventh creature black? No relation to either H. Rap Brown or Grandmaster Flash, but not this fellow. This fellow wore plain white shirts and faded into the woodwork penny slacks. And he sat in the Library Carrel of the University of Maine, writing papers on the origin of footnotes and the possible advantages of ISBN numbers and book cataloging, while the marched outside and Phil Oakes sang Richard Nixon, "Find Yourself Another Country to Be Part of." The men died with their stomachs blown out for villages whose names they could not pronounce. He sat there studiously bent over his work. Bill saw him, which lay in a slant of crisp white winterlight, his face sober and absorbed, knowing that to be a librarian was to come as close as any human being can do sitting in the peak seat of eternity's engine. That was way too long. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That sentence was 12 lines long. Mr. King, dial it back. Was he the seventh? Or was it a young man sitting before his mirror, looking at the way his forehead was growing, looking at a comb full of pulled out red hairs, looking at a pile of university notebooks on the desk reflected in the mirror, notebooks which held the completed messy first draft of a novel entitled Joanna, which would be published a year later? Some of the above, all of the above, none of the above. It didn't matter, really. The seventh was there, and in that one moment they all felt it, and perhaps understood best the dreadful power of the thing that had brought them all back. It lives, Bill thought, cold inside his clothes. Eye of newt, tail of dragon, hand of glory, whatever it was. It's here again, in Derry. It. And he felt suddenly that it was the seventh, that it and time were somehow interchangeable, that it wore all of their faces as well as thousands of others with which it had terrified and killed. And the idea that it had been them was somehow the most frightening idea of it all. What if, in Chapter 2, Pennywise posed as Stan the entire time? Like, what if Stan came back, but it was Pennywise, and the entire movie, Pennywise was just posing as Stan, and like, oh my gosh, that'd be such a good fan fiction. Where's my notebook? It's over there. No one steal that idea from me. Oh my gosh, that'd be, okay. Okay. How much of us was left behind here, he thought with sudden rising terror. How much of us never left the drains and the sewers where it lived and where it fed? Is that what we forgot? Because part of each of us never had any future, never grew, never left Derry? Is that why? No, because Meg never left. He saw no answers on their faces, only his own questions reflected back at him. Thoughts form and pass in a matter of seconds or milliseconds and create their own time frames. And all this passed through Bill Denborough's mind in a space no more than 5 seconds. Then Richie Tozier, leaning back against the wall, grinned again and said, "Oh my, look at this. Bill Denborough went for the chrome dome, look. How long you been turtle waxing your head, Big Bill?" Then Bill, with no idea of what might come out, opened his mouth and heard himself say, "Fuck you and the horse you rode in on, trash mouth." There was a moment of silence, and then the room exploded with laughter. Bill crossed them and began to shake hands, and while there was something horrible in what he now felt, there was also something comforting about it, the sensation of having come home for good. "I'm so sorry, Stan. You couldn't be there with them. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with my Stanley Pop figure? There's a little boo-boo on him. I never noticed that. It's a little, I don't know if you can see it. There's like a little like indent above his nose. Or not indent, like outdent. Bulge thing. I'm sorry, dude." Okay. Back to this. Jeez, I need to focus. Oh my gosh. We have like 10 more pages. Yeah, we have like 10 more pages. Ah! Almost done, guys. You should put one on his wrists. Put what on his wrists? What? Put what on his wrist? I'm confused. An indent. Oh, dude! No! No! I'm not doing that! Can't even see his wrists. Okay, you can. I'm not doing that. That's not nice. Back to the book. I'm gonna go cry now. Part 3. Ben Hanscom gets skinny. Mike Hanlon ordered drinks, and as if to make up for the prior silence, everyone began to talk at once. Beverly Marsh was now Beverly Rogan, it turned out. She said she was married to a wonderful man in Chicago who had turned her whole life around and who had, by some benign magic, been able to transform his wife's simple talent for sewing into a successful dress business. Eddie Casbrack owned a limousine company in New York. For all I know, my wife could be in bed with Al Pacino right now, he said, smiling mildly, and the room broke up. They all knew that what Bill and Ben had been up to, but Bill had a peculiar sense that there had been no personal association of their names. Ben as an architect, himself as a writer, with people they had known as children until very, very recently. Beverly had paperback copies of Joanna and the Black Rapids in her purse, and asked him if he would sign them. Bill did so, noticing as he did that both books were in mint condition, as if they had been purchased in the airport newsstand as she got off the plane. Unlike fashion, Richie told Ben how he had admired the BBC Communication Centre in London, but there was a puzzled sort of light in his eyes, as if he could not quite reconcile that building with this man, or with that fat earnest boy who had showed them how to flood out half the barrens with scrounged boards and a rusty car door. Richie was a disc jockey in California. I'm going to stand down. He's making me too sad. He had told them he was known as the man of thousand voices, and Bill groaned. God, Richie, your voices were always so terrible. Flattery will get you nowhere, mister. Flattery will get you nowhere, mister, Richie replied loftily. When Beverly asked him if he wore contacts now, Richie said in a low voice, "Come a little closer, baby. Look at my eyes." Beverly did, and exclaimed delightedly as Richie tilted his head a little so she could see the lower rims of the hydro-mist soft lenses he wore. "Is the library still the same?" Ben asked Mike Hanlon. Mike took out his wallet and produced a snap of the library, taken from above. He did it with the proud air of a man producing snapshots of his kid when asked about his family. "Guy in a light plane took this," he said, as the picture went from hand to hand. "I've been trying to get either the city council or some well-heeled private donor to supply enough cash to get it blown up to mural size for the children's library. So far, no soap. But it's a good picture, huh?" And they all agreed that it was. Ben held it longest, looking at it fixedly. Finally, he tapped the glass corridor which connected the two buildings. "Do you recognize this from anywhere else, Mike?" Mike smiled. "It's a communication center," he said, and all 6 of them burst out laughing. The drinks came. They sat down. That silence, sudden, awkward, and perplexing, fell again. They looked at each other. I'm trying to look ahead to see when they talk about Stan, because I'm stressed. "Well," Beverly asked in her sweet, slightly husky voice, "what do we drink to?" "To us," Richie said suddenly. Now he wasn't smiling. His eyes caught Bill's with a force so great he could barely deal with it. Bill remembered himself and Richie in the middle of Newbolt Street, after the thing which might have been a clown or which might have been a werewolf had disappeared, embracing each other and weeping. When he picked up his glass, his hand was trembling, and some of his drink spilled on the napery. Richie rose slowly to his feet, and one by one the others followed suit. Bill first, then Ben and Eddie, Beverly, and finally Mike Hanlon. "To us," Richie said, and like Bill's hand, his voice trembled a little. "To the Losers Club of 1958. "The Losers," Beverly said, slightly amused. "The Losers," Eddie said. His face was pale and old behind his rimless glasses. "The Losers," Ben agreed. A faint and painful smile ghosted at the corners of his mouth. I need to stop yawning. "The Losers," Mike Hanlon said softly. "The Losers," Bill finished. Their glasses touched. They drank. That silence fell again, and this time Richie did not break it. This time the silence seemed necessary. They sat back down, and Bill said, "So spill it, Mike. Tell us what's been happening here and what we can do." "Eat first," Mike said. "We'll talk afterward." So they ate. They ate long and well. Like that old joke about the condemned man, Bill thought, but his own appetite was better than it had been in ages. Since he was a kid, he was tempted to think. The food was not stunningly good, but it was far from bad, and there was lots of it. The six of them began trading stuff back and forth. Spare ribs. Ooh, I don't know how to pronounce that, so I'm not going to even try. Chicken wings that had been delicately braised, egg rolls, water chestnuts wrapped in bacon, strips of beef that had been threaded onto wooden skewers. They began with poo-poo platters, and Richie made a childish but amusing business of broiling a little bit of everything over the flaming pot in the center of the platter he was sharing with Beverly, including half an egg roll and a few red kidney beans. Flambe at my table. I love it, he told Ben. I'd eat shit on a shingle if it was flambe at my table. And probably has, Bill remarked. Beverly laughed so hard at that she had to spit a mouthful of food into her napkin. Oh, God, I think I'm going to Ralph, Richie said in an eerily exact imitation of Don Pardo. And Beverly laughed harder, blushing a bright red. Stop it, Richie, she said. I'm warning you. The warning is taken, Richie said. Eat well, dear. Rose herself brought them their dessert, a great mound of baked Alaska, which she ignited at the head of the table where Mike sat. More flambe at my table, Richie said in the voice of a man who has died and gone to heaven. This may be the best meal I've ever eaten in my life. But of course, Rose said demurely. If I blow that out, do I get my wish? She asked her. At Jade of the Orient, all wishes are granted, sir. What? Am I lighting that? Richie's smile faltered suddenly. I want that on my wall. At Jade of the Orient, all wishes are granted, sir. I'll paint it on my wall. Richie's smile faltered suddenly. I applaud the sentiment, he said, but I really doubt the veracity. They almost demolished the baked Alaska. As Bill sat back, his belly straining against the waistband of his pants, he happened to notice the glasses on the table. There seemed to be hundreds of them. He grinned a little, realizing that he himself had sunk 2 martinis before the meal, and God knew how many bottles of Kirin beer with it. The others had done about as well. In their state, fried chunks of bowling pin would probably have tasted okay. And yet, he didn't feel drunk. I haven't eaten like that since I was a kid, Ben said. They looked at him, and a faint flush of color tinged his cheeks. I mean it, literally. That may have been the biggest meal I've eaten since I was a sophomore in high school. Went on a diet? Eddie said. Yeah, Ben said. I did. The Ben Hanscom Freedom Diet. What got you going? Richie asked. You don't want to hear all that ancient history, Ben shifted uncomfortably. I don't know about the rest of them, Bill said, but I do. Come on, Ben, give. What turned old Haystack Calhoun into the magazine model we see before us today? Bill snorted a little. Haystack, right. I'd forgotten that. I need to prepare myself for this long story. It's not much of a story, Ben said. No story at all, really. After that summer, after 1958, we stayed in Derry another 2 years. Then my mom lost her job. I'm going to write down when they all moved. Sorry, not to be a bother. Bill moved right after 1958. Ben moved in 1960 to Nebraska. Interesting. Because she had a sister there who offered to take us in until my mother got on her feet again. It wasn't so great. Her sister, my Aunt Jean, was a miserly bitch who had to keep telling you what your place in the great scheme of things was. How lucky we were that my mom had a sister who gave us such charity. How lucky we were to not be on a welfare, all that sort of thing. I was so glad I disgusted her. She couldn't leave it alone. Ben, you ought to get more exercise. Ben, you'll have a heart attack before you're 40 if you don't lose weight. Ben, with little children starving in the world, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. He paused for a moment and sipped some water. As will I. The thing was, she also trotted the starving children out if I didn't clean my plate. Richie laughed and nodded. Anyway, the country was just pulling out of a recession, and my mother was almost a year finding steady work. By the time we moved out of Aunt Jean's place in La Vista and got our own in Omaha, I'd put on about 90 pounds over what you guys knew me. I think I put on most of it just to spite my Aunt Jean. Eddie whistled. That would have put you at about 210, Ben said gravely. Anyway, I was going to East Side High School. Look at High School Musical. Ben would have loved going to East High. Oh, but it's the 1960s. Anyways. And the phys ed periods were, well, pretty bad. The other kids call me Jugs. That'll give you the idea. The ragging went on for about 7 months, and then one day we were getting dressed in the locker room after the period. 2 or 3 of the guys started to kind of slap my gut. They called it fat paddling. Pretty soon, 2 or 3 got in on it. Then 4 or 5 more. Pretty soon it was all of them, chasing me around the locker room and up the hall, rocking my gut, my butt, my back, my legs. I got scared and started to scream. That made the rest of them laugh like crazy. You know, he said, looking down and carefully rearranging his silverware. That's the last time I can remember thinking of Henry Bowers until Mike called me 2 days ago. The kid who started it was a farm boy with these big old hands, and they were all chasing after me. I remember thinking that Henry had come back. I know that's when I panicked. They chased me up the hall past the lockers where the guys who played sports kept their stuff. I was naked and red as a lobster. I'd lost any sense of dignity or myself, I guess you'd say. Where myself was. I was screaming for help. And here they came after me, screaming, "Fat paddling, fat paddling, fat paddling." There was a bench. "Ben, you don't have to put yourself through this," Beverly said suddenly. Her face had gone ashy pale. She toyed with her water glass and almost spilled it. "Let him finish," Bill said. Ben looked at him for a moment and then nodded. There was a bench at the end of the corridor. I fell over and hit my head. They were all around me in another minute or two, and then this voice said, "Okay, that's enough. You guys go change up." It was Coach, standing there in the doorway wearing his blue sweatpants with the white stripe up the sides and his white t-shirt. There was no way of telling how long he'd been standing there. They all just looked at him, some of them grinning, some of them guilty, some of them just looking sort of vacant. They went away, and I burst into tears. Coach just stood there in the doorway, leading back to the gym, watching this naked fat boy with his skin all red from the fat paddling, watching this fat kid cry in the corner. And he finally said, "Benny, why don't you just fucking shut up?" It shocked me so much to hear a teacher use that word that I did. I looked up at him, and he came over and sat down on the bench I'd fallen over. He leaned over me and the whistle around his neck swung out and bonked me on the forehead. For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me or something. And then I shrank back from him. But what he did was grab one of my tits in each hand and squeeze. Then he took his hands away and rubbed them on his pants like he touched something dirty. "You think I'm going to comfort you?" he asked me. "I'm not. You discuss them and you discuss me as well. We got different reasons, but that's because they're kids and I'm not. They don't know why you discuss them. I do know. It's because I see you burying the good body God gave you in a great big mess of fat. It's a lot of stupid self-indulgence and it makes me want to puke." I'm sorry. Just saying. I don't like that has my voice attached to it now. Now listen to me, Benny, because this is the only time I'm going to say it to you. I got a football team to coach and basketball and track, and somewhere in here I got swimming teams. So I'll just say it once. You're fat up here. And he tapped my forehead right where his damned whistle had bonked me. That's where everybody's fat. You put what's between your ears on a diet and you're going to lose weight. But guys like you never do. What a bastard, Beverly said indignantly. Yeah, Ben said, grinning. But he didn't know he was a bastard. That's how dumb he was. He'd probably seen Jack Webb in the movie The D.I. about 60 times, and he actually thought he was doing me a favor. But as it turned out, he was. Because I thought of something right then. Looked away, frowning. And Bill had the strangest feeling that he knew what Ben was going to say before he said it. I told you that the last time I can remember of Henry Bowers was when the other boys were chasing after me in the fat paddling. Well, when the coach was getting up to go, that was the last time I really thought of what we'd done in the summer of 58. I keep wanting to say 1989, because that's the year that it was in the 2017 movie. I thought. He hesitated again, looking at each of them in turn, seeming to search their faces. He went on carefully. I thought of how good we worked together. I thought of what we did and how we did it, and all it hit me at once. And all at once it hit me that if Coach had faced anything like that, his hair would probably have turned all white at once. His hair would probably have turned white all at once, and his heart would have stopped dead in his chest like an old watch. That's what happened to Henry in the Deadlights in the 1990 miniseries. His hair would probably have turned white all at once. Okay, only 3 more pages. I'm gonna try and stop talking so much, but I can't promise you anything. I talk a lot. It wasn't fair, of course, that he hadn't been fair to me. What happened was simple enough. You got mad, Bill said. Ben smiled. Yeah, that's right, he said. I called Coach. He turned around and looked at me. You say Coach Track? I asked him. That's right, he said. Not that it's anything to you. You listen to me, you stupid, stone-brained son of a bitch, I said, and his mouth dropped open and his eyes bugged out. I'll be out there for the track team in March. What do you think about that? I think you better shut your mouth before he gets you into big trouble, he said. I'm going to run down everyone you got out, I said. I'm going to run down your best, and then I want a fucking apology from you. His fist clenched, and for a moment I thought he was going to come back in there and let me have it. Then they unclenched again. You just keep talking, fat boy, he said softly. You got the motor mouth. But the day you can outrun my best will be the day that I quit this place and go back to picking corn on the circuit. And he left. You lost the weight, Richie asked. Well, I did, Ben said. But Coach was wrong. It didn't start in my head. It started with my mother. I went home that night and told her I wanted to lose some weight. We ended up having a hell of a fight, both of us crying. She started out with some with the same old song with that same old song and dance. I wasn't really fat. I was just big boned, and a big boy who was going to be a big man had to eat and just to stay even. It was a kind of security thing for her, I think. It was scary for her trying to raise a boy on her own. She had no education, no real skills, just a willingness to work hard. And when she could give me a second helping, or when she could look across the table at me and see that I was looking solid, she felt like she was winning the battle, Mike said. Uh-huh. Ben drank the last of his beer. This isn't beer, it's just water, but and wiped a small mustache of foam off his upper lip with the heel of his hand. So the biggest fight wasn't with my head, it was with her. She wouldn't accept it, not for months. She wouldn't take in my clothes, and she wouldn't buy me new ones. I was running by then. I ran everywhere. Sometimes my heart pounded so hard I felt like I was going to pass out. The first of my mile runs, I finished by puking, and then by fainting. Then for a while, I just puked. And after a while, I was holding up my pants while I ran. I got a paper route, and I ran with a bag around my neck, bouncing against my chest while I held up my pants. My shirt started to look like sails, and nights when I went home and would only eat half the stuff on my plate, my mother would burst into tears and say that I was starving myself, killing myself, that I didn't love her anymore, that I didn't care about how hard she worked for me. Christ, Richie muttered, lighting a cigarette. I don't know how you handled it, Ben. I just kept the coach's face in front of me, Ben said. I just kept remembering the way he looked at me after he grabbed my tits in the hallway of the boys' locker room that time. That's how I did it. I got myself some new jeans and stuff with the paper route money. And the old guy in the first floor apartment used his awl to punch some new holes in my belt, about 5 of them, as I remember. I think that I might have remembered the other time I had to buy a pair of new jeans. That was when Henry pushed me into the Barrens that day, and they just about torn off my body. Yeah, he said, grinning. You told me about the chocolate milk. And you told me about the chocolate milk, remember that? Ben nodded. If I did remember, he went on. It was just for a second, there and gone. About that same time, I started taking health and nutrition at school, and I found out you could eat about all the raw green stuff you wanted and not gain weight. So one night, my mother put on a salad with lettuce and raw spinach in it, and chunks of apple, and maybe a little leftover ham. I've never liked rabbit food that much, but I had 3 helpings and just raved on and on to my mother about how good it was. That went a long way towards solving the problem. She didn't care so much what I ate as long as I ate a lot of it. She buried me in salads. I ate them for the next 3 years. There were times when I had to look in the mirror to make sure my nose wasn't wriggling. Rabbit and wriggling. Yeah, okay. Anyways, stop talking, Lyrica. So what happened to the coach? Eddie asked. Did you go out for track? He touched his aspirator as if the thought of running had reminded him of it. Oh yeah, I went out, Ben said. The 220 and the 440. By then I'd lost 70 pounds and I'd sprung up 2 inches. So that that what was left was better distributed. On the first day of trials, I won the 220 by 6 lengths and the 440 by 8. When I went over to Coach, who looked mad enough to chew his nails and spit out staples, I said, "Looks like it's time to get out." I said, "Looks like it's time you got out on your circus and started picking corn. When are you heading down Kansas Way?" He didn't say a thing at first, just swung a roundhouse and knocked me flat on my back. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. I've read this book, but I didn't realize it. Then he told me to get off his field. Said he didn't want a smart-mouthed bastard like me on his track team. "I want to be on it if President Kennedy appointed me to it," I said, wiping the blood out of the corner of my mouth. And since you got me going, I won't hold you to it. But the next time you sit down to a big plate of corn on the cob, spare me a thought." He told me if I didn't get out right then, he was going to beat the living crap out of me. Ben was smiling a little, but there was nothing very pleasant about that smile. Certainly nothing nostalgic. Those were his exact words. Everyone was watching us, including the kids I'd beaten. I looked pretty embarrassed. So I just said, "I'll tell you what, Coach. You get 1 free on account of you're a sore loser, but too old to learn any better now. But you put 1 more on me, and I'll try to see to it that you lose your job. I'm not sure I can do it, but I can make a pretty good try. I lost the weight so I could have a little dignity and a little peace. Those are things worth fighting for." Bill said, "All that sounds wonderful, Ben, but the writer in me wonders if any kid ever really did talk like that." Ben nodded, still smiling that peculiar smile. "I doubt if any kid who hadn't been through the things we went through ever did," he said. "But I said them, and I meant them." Bill thought about this and then nodded. "All right. He's smarter than you, Bill. Get over it." The coach stood back with his hands on the hips of his sweatpants, Ben said. He opened his mouth, and then he closed it again. Nobody said anything. I walked off, and that was the last I had to do with Coach Woodley. When my homeroom teacher handed me the course sheet for my junior year, someone had typed the word "excuse" next to phys ed, and he initialed it. "You beat him," Rich exclaimed, and shook his clenched hands over his head. "Way to go, Ben!" Ben shrugged. "Oh no, I just read ahead." Ben shrugged. I think what I did was beat part of myself. Coach got me going, I guess, but it was thinking of you guys that made me really believe that I could do it. And I did do it. You do anything with the losers. Ben shrugged charmingly, but Bill believed he could see fine drops of sweat in his hairline. And the true confessions, except I sure could use another beer. Talking thirsty work. Retweet, brother. Mike signaled the waitress. All 6 of them ended up ordering drinks another round, and they talked of light matters until the drinks came. Bill looked into his beer, watching the way the bubbles crawled up the sides of the glass. He was both amused and appalled to realize he was hoping someone else would begin to story about the years between, that Beverly would tell them about the wonderful man she married, even if he was boring, as most wonderful men were, or that Richie Tozier would begin to expound on funny incidents in the broadcasting studio, or that Eddie Kasprak would tell them what Teddy Kennedy was really like, how much Robert Redford tipped, or maybe offer some insights into why Ben had been able to give up the extra pounds while he had needed to hang on to his aspirator. I'm going to reposition myself because my foot's falling asleep. The fact is, Bill thought, Mike is going to start talking any minute now, and I'm not sure I want to hear what he has to say. The fact is, my heart is beating just a little too fast, my hands are just a little too cold. The fact is, I'm just about 25 years too old to be this scared. We all are. So say something, someone. Let's talk of careers and spouses and what it's like to look at your old playmates and realize that you've taken a few really good shots in the nose from time itself. Let's talk about sex, baseball, the price of gas, the future of the Warsaw Pact nations, anything but what we came here to talk about. So say something, somebody. Someone did. Eddie Kasprak did. It was not what Teddy Kennedy was really like, or how much Redford had tipped, or even why he had found it necessary to keep what Richie had sometimes called Eddie's lung sucker in the old days. He asked Mike when Stan Uris had died. The night before last, when I made the calls. Did it have to do with why we're here? I could beg the question and say that since he didn't leave a note, no one can know for sure, Mike answered. But since it happened almost immediately after I called him, I think the assumption is safe enough. He killed himself, didn't he? Beverly said dully. Oh God, poor Stan. I'm gonna cry. The others were looking at Mike, who finished his drink and said, he committed suicide, yes. Apparently he went up to the bathroom shortly after I called him and drew a bath, got into it and cut his wrists. Bill looked down at the table, which seemed suddenly lined with the shocked, pale faces, no bodies, only those faces, like white circles, like white balloons, moon balloons, tethered here by an old promise that should have been long that should have long since lapsed. How did you find out? Richie asked. Was it carried in the papers up here? No. For some time now, I've subscribed to the papers of those towns closest to all of you. I've kept tabs over the years. I spy. Reggie's face was sour. I spy. Reggie's face was sour. Thanks, Mike. It's my job, Mike said simply. Poor Stan, Beverly repeated. She seemed stunned, unable to cope with the news. Sorry, this part kills me. I have like this page memorized. I can't. But he was so brave back then, so determined. People change, Eddie said. Do they? Bill asked. Stan was. He moved his hands on the tablecloth, trying to catch the right words. He was an ordered person, the kind of person who has to have his books divided up into fiction and nonfiction on his shelves, and then wants to have each section in alphabetical order. I can remember something he said once. I don't remember where we were, what we were doing, at least not yet, but I think it was toward the end of things. He said he could stand to be scared, but he hated being dirty. That seemed to me the essence of Stan. Maybe it was just too much when Mike called. He saw his choices as being only two: stay alive and get dirty, or die clean. Maybe people don't really change as much as we think. Maybe they just stiffen up. There was a moment of silence, and then Richie said, All right, Mike, what's happening in Derry? Tell us. I can tell you some, Mike said. I can tell you, for instance, what's happening now. But I can tell you some things about yourselves. But I can't tell you everything that happened back in summer of 1958. I don't believe I'll ever have to. Eventually you'll remember it yourselves. Eventually you'll remember it for yourselves. And I think if I had told you too much before your minds were ready to remember what happened to Stan, might happen to all of us, Ben asked quietly. Mike nodded. Yes, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. Bill said, Then tell us what you can, Mike. All right, he said. I will. And that's where we're going to stop for tonight. It bothers me when people say that Stan died because he was scared, because that quote right there by Bill just is his entire essence. Like he says, that is exactly what happened. He could stand being scared, but he hated being dirty. That's what. Okay, if you haven't seen my videos on TikTok talking about this, maybe I'll when I end this live stream, I fold my laundry, I'll just record myself ranting about Stanley and then post it over here. But in literature, when a person is submerged into a body of water and comes back out alive, it's seen as a baptism, sort of like a rebirth. Because if a character falls into a river, they could have died, but they came back alive, so they're rebirthed into a new life. Well, for Stan, he takes a bath before he dies, kind of cleansing his soul before he dies. As he says, he could stand being scared but hated being dirty, so he didn't want to die dirty with all those thoughts of Pennywise. So he went to clean his soul and cleanse himself before he died. He wanted to die clean. That's just what Bill said. He didn't want to stay alive and get dirty. And he did have to kill himself because even just remembering Pennywise was being dirty. Because it messes his fear is just the fact that is how Pennywise's world doesn't match with his world. That imperfection of it doesn't work. That's why he's scared of the picture lady. Her face is all contorted. Picture lady? the flute lady, Judith. Her name's Judith. That's why he's scared of her. She doesn't fit in his world. When Richie asks, "Is she hot?" the first thing that Stan says is, "Her face is messed up." So just remembering Pennywise is enough to bring that all back for him, and never be able to get away from it. Yeah. It just bugs me when people say that he's just an old scaredy cat. Beverly says he was so brave back then. He was brave. Ugh, he was brave. Leave him alone. Sadly, that's like the only time that they talk about him. Well, not sadly, because that means I'm not going to cry every time we read. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna try and see what we're gonna read next time. How much longer is this chapter? Probably really long. It's that long. So yeah, I'll have to break this into at least another 2 parts. Oh no, we could do all that in one. That's what? That's 34 pages. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that next time. So next time we'll finish chapter 10. Hopefully we'll finish chapter 10. It's 34 pages, which is less than we read tonight. No, it's not. Is it? No, it's like the same amount. Okay, so we'll read 34 pages. Yeah, okay, we'll do it great. Okay, that's what we'll do next time. Ooh, I actually don't know if I'm going to be able to next week. I might not be able to do this next week. Actually, I have plans. So maybe on the 30th. Ooh, maybe I could read on Monday. Oh, no, I can't. Never mind. Ooh, maybe on Sunday. That's what I mean. Sunday night. Maybe I might read on Sunday night. If I decide that I do, I'll post on TikTok. Then I'm going to be reading because I don't school the next day. So make sure you're following my TikTok at Quietly.Screamy. I don't know how you would have found me if you weren't following that, though. I think I have a splinter. That's not important. But yeah, so maybe I'll see you tomorrow. That'd be fun if I read tomorrow. Kind of got ahead a little bit because I probably won't be able to on Saturday. All right. Well, I will see you all later. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I love the adult Luz interactions. I think they're really sweet. And I really feel bad that Stan's not there. And also, all of his existence makes me cry. But I was going to say, maybe next time it'll be happier, but it won't be happier. It will be sadder. So, get excited. I'm excited. I hope you all have a great night. I hope you are safe out there with the state of the world, but also just being safe in general. Don't get eaten by a clown. And I hope you have a great night or a great morning or a great day, wherever you are, whatever time it is you're watching this. I hope it's great. I hope you have a great time. I will see you whenever I see you again. Yeah, thanks for joining us. See you next time. Good night or goodbye. It's nighttime for me. Bye.